Well, good morning, everybody. Wow, this is like being on the bridge of the Enterprise. Man. Okay. We are beginning this morning, folks, in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 7, starting in verse 24. If you do have your Bibles with you, it's always better to open up, or if you've got them on your devices, it's better to read. You can gauge better when it's right in front of you rather than on the screen. But in verse 24, it says, Jesus left that place and went to the vicinity of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know it, yet he would not keep his presence secret. In fact, as soon as she heard about him, a woman whose little daughter was possessed by an evil spirit came and fell at his feet. The woman was a Greek, born in Syrian Phoenicia. She begged Jesus to drive the demon out of her daughter. First, let the children eat all they want, he told her, for it is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to their dogs. Yes, Lord, she replied, but even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. Then he told her, for such a reply you may go. The demon has left your daughter. She went home and found her child lying on the bed and the demon gone. Now we're going to flip over to the Gospel of Matthew and read his account of this very same event. Matthew 15, starting in verse 21. Leaving that place, Jesus withdrew to the region of Tyre and Sidon. A Canaanite woman from that vicinity came to him crying out, Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me. My daughter is suffering terribly from demon possession. Jesus did not answer a word, so his disciples came to him and urged him, send her away, for she keeps crying out after us. He answered, I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel. The woman came and knelt before him. Lord, help me, she said. He replied, it is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to their dogs. Yes, Lord, she said, but even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table. Then Jesus answered, Woman, you have great faith. Your request is granted, and her daughter was healed from that very hour. Now, in the account as told by Mark, we have a very simple story. A Gentile woman asked Jesus for help for her demon-possessed daughter. At first, it appears Jesus isn't going to help her, or at least he's not too keen on helping her, but because of the woman's response, he relents, and she goes home to find her daughter cured. The Matthew version, though it's only a verse longer, adds all sorts of interesting detail. The disciples play an integral part, and Jesus commends the woman for having great faith. There are figurative references to animals. Both versions of the story speak of dogs, and Matthew's version has a reference to sheep. But in the end, what stands out to me is that Jesus seems to be unwilling to comply with this woman's request. And why? Well, it would appear because she's not a Jew. And it appears at first glance that this woman's clever answer was able to get Jesus to change his mind. Now, does anybody else find this story at least a little disturbing? I mean, if you interject some other interpretations here that might touch on some hot-button issues in modern America, it becomes even more difficult. Jesus seems to be looking askance at this person because she's part of a different ethnic group, an ethnic minority. Maybe it's because of her gender or because of her religion. Maybe she's a single mom. Maybe her daughter would be considered a special needs child by today's standards. Maybe she's out of money. She's out of options. If the soundbite media, the folks on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram had been listening in but not paying attention to the last conversation of the story, the headlines that we would see on the internet might be something like, Jesus hesitates to help foreign woman with special needs child. Or, Jesus compares Palestinians to dogs. Now, of course, that's not what really happened. But in the context of this very difficult passage, where Jesus does indeed seem to refer to Gentiles as dogs and appears to need his mind changed when it comes to offering them help, what is the gospel telling us here? Well, first let's look at the context. Matthew 15:21 says he left Galilee and withdrew to the region of Tyre and Sidon. The implication is he's sort of sneaking away. Mark's version says he went to a particular house in secret, yet he could not keep his location and identity unknown. Jesus has just had a series of rancorous debates with the Pharisees. Maybe he's just looking to get away, get some rest, get some refreshment, recharge his batteries, if you will, and I think that's understandable. I can imagine Jesus saying to his disciples, hey guys, let's go someplace where there are no Pharisees critical of us standing on every street corner. And we will see later, maybe he wanted some private time with his disciples to instruct them. But then along comes this woman. Mark identifies her as being ethnically Greek and a resident of Syria and Phoenicia. This would have been an area to the north and west of Galilee, near the Mediterranean coast, in an area that today is either in Lebanon or southern Syria. Matthew identifies her as being a Canaanite. Now that would tie her to an ethnic group that was traditionally the most hated enemy of Israel. Throughout Israel's history, the people of Canaan were either at war with Israel or distracting the people through demonic idol worship. The most famous person in the Bible who was from this region was Jezebel. Now, the historic event that solidified the hatred between Jews and the people of this region came in the years between the Old and New Testament. Approximately 200 years before Jesus was born, the Seleucid Empire, which was centered in this area, conquered the Jewish nation and sacked Jerusalem. They slaughtered men, women, and children by the thousands. Their leader, Antiochus Epiphanes, who was a tyrant king of Greek ancestry, went to the Jewish temple, slaughtered all the priests, and then sat there and proclaimed himself to be God. The miraculous deliverance of the Jewish nation from this oppression is celebrated every year by Jews around the world in December in the holiday of Hanukkah. So there is no love lost between the Jews of Jesus' time and the people of Tyre and Sidon. In relationship to Jesus and his disciples, this woman is an alien. She's an outsider. The expected route she would have taken to seek help for her daughter would have been either to hire a Greek physician or to go to the pagan temple of the Phoenician god of healing. In either case, she would have probably been expected to pay vast sums of money in order to get the help she was seeking. This would have been normal for a woman from this area, and perhaps she'd already tried and failed. She ends up falling at the feet of Jesus. Now, I would think that of all the people who might seek help for a personal need, the hardest person to turn away would be a mother seeking help for her child. And that's what makes Jesus' response all the more problematic. If you look at other verses, in Matthew 9:36, it says that when he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless, like a sheep without a shepherd. And if you flip back into the Old Testament in Isaiah 40, verse 11, in a prophecy that was about Jesus, it says, he tends his flock like a shepherd. He gathers the lambs in his arms and carries them close to his heart. He gently leads those that have young. This is what we know about the compassion and mercy of Jesus, particularly regarding parents with children. How can we reconcile this with his response to this woman? How can we have such a heartfelt, deep-seated need and to have Jesus respond like this? But we do need to be careful. Sometimes in modern medicine, doctors treat people and they look over what's obvious and they make a diagnosis. But sometimes they might neglect to review all the notes that are in the record. And if they miss those details, it will cause a misdiagnosis, a misinterpretation. In medicine, that can be fatal. Here in the Bible, that can lead to grievous misunderstanding. So what do we do with this story? Can we get it to fit into our understanding of what we know about Jesus from elsewhere in the Bible? Or does this story stand out as significant because it's so unlikely? For example, in Luke 7, Jesus encounters a funeral procession where a widow's only son has died, and in verse 13 it says, his heart went out to her, and he raised the boy from the dead. An amazing act of power and compassion. Now, this story with this Greek woman seems to be in the reverse. Jesus seems to dismiss this woman's similarly deep-seated concern. But again, we need to look at the context. What is going on just before this story happens is Jesus has been engaged in a heated series of debates with the Pharisees over the concept of spiritual purity. The Pharisees were critical of Jesus and his disciples for not following Jewish tradition. Jesus responded by pointing out that the Pharisees follow the letter and not the spirit of the law, that it doesn't matter what a person does externally, but what is in his heart that counts. To the Pharisees, this Gentile woman represented defilement. Jews were not allowed to touch Gentiles or risk ritual impurity. They also would have never allowed the law to be taught to a woman, to any woman, not even a Jewish woman. The Pharisees were concerned about being externally clean. And the disciples, it says, were confused by this. They weren't understanding what Jesus was saying. Now, some Bible commentators look at this story, and they are convinced that Jesus was not willing to help this woman until her clever answer changed his mind. Now, personally, I don't buy that. Jesus is God. I think he's in complete control all the time. And he was seeking to teach his disciples something as well as reach this woman. Jesus knew that his disciples needed to understand exactly who he is and why he came, and that this foreign woman came to an understanding of that concept that his disciples had yet to grasp. So let's look at the exchange between this woman and Jesus. According to Matthew 15:22, she addresses him as Lord, Son of David. She's addressing Jesus as the Messiah. Now, she could have been doing this because she's just heard the rumors about him and the stories. She's trying to get his attention. But I think she's really doing this out of an authentic sense of faith. She truly recognized who Jesus is, and she knows because of this that Jesus is able to help her. In fact, she recognizes that Jesus is the only one who can help her. But then it says Jesus didn't answer a word. There was silence. Now, I don't think Jesus is being passive-aggressive or snubbing her. He is biding his time. His silence has a purpose, and I think it's because he wants his disciples involved in the conversation, and they certainly don't disappoint us. I imagine this woman did not impress the disciples. They would have viewed her through the same lens of prejudice I've already described. They would have seen her as part of an ethnic group considered the enemy of Israel, and they are irritated. It says, "Send her away, for she keeps crying out after us." Picture the scene. Jesus and his disciples moving down the street. Jesus is in front, and he's not responding to the woman who's behind the disciples, and she's kind of tugging at their shirt tail, saying, "Hey, I want you to talk to the master for me." And so Jesus' disciples say to him, "Please, Jesus, this woman is a pain in the neck. Get rid of her. Give her what she wants or send her away. She's driving us all nuts." And Jesus continues purposeful involvement. In verse 24, he responds, not to the woman, but to his disciples. And he says, "I was only sent to the lost sheep of Israel." Now, this seems to play right into the prejudices his disciples are already feeling. But all Jesus is doing here is expressing the will of God. His primary mission during his time on earth was indeed to the people of Israel, that is, to Jews. The Jews are God's chosen people. They were the guardians of God's commandments. Jesus was the fulfillment of every prophecy connected with the Jewish Messiah. He was the heir to the throne of David. In his writings, Paul makes it clear that salvation originates with the Jews and that God's revelation and judgments are first for the Jews and then for the Gentile. Jesus was sent to Israel, and he chose to limit himself, to be born into the world as a human being. So he couldn't be at the beck and call of everybody. He couldn't be everywhere at once. Other than a few isolated exceptions, this being one, Jesus spent his entire ministry in Judea and Galilee. Now, I want you to think about that for a second. The God of the universe invades time and space and comes into the world, and he limits himself to a backwater province in an obscure part of the Middle East. Now, if I'd been planning that, I would have sent Jesus to big population centers like Rome or Athens or Alexandria. But God doesn't have it that way. Now, this is very hard to understand. Jesus came into the world to atone for sin and to offer salvation to everyone in the world. The scriptures are clear that God has a plan to minister to the Gentiles. But that's going to happen when the Holy Spirit comes after Christ's death and resurrection. So at the time this story takes place, that's in the future. And what is clear also is that Jesus, with his human limitations, did not come to engage in a ministry of worldwide healing. This is obvious even in his ministry to the Jews. For in John chapter 5 and verse 30, Jesus is at the pool at Bethesda, and it says, "A great number of disabled people used to lie there, the blind, the lame, and the paralyzed. I guess I misnumbered that. Yet only one of those people was healed, not all of them. So why? Why didn't Jesus heal everybody? I guess it's a mystery. It's a difficult concept to understand. It was the will of God. Jesus was not on a worldwide mass healing mission. Not everyone who came to him with a need was a recipient of his generosity. We need to understand that in encounter of this story. It was true then. I think it's still true today. But then, as things move along in Matthew 15:25, this woman ups the ante. She falls on her knees in front of Jesus, and everything's reduced to this little phrase, Lord, help me. The original Greek words here are two familiar words, especially to those of us who were raised in the Roman Catholic Church. Kyrie eleison, literally, Lord have mercy. Arguably, this woman is not just begging for help, but this fits in with her recognition of who Jesus is. He's the Messiah, the Son of God. She's in an attitude of worship, even as she's crying out for help. And because she understands who she is, we can read between the lines. What she's saying is, look, Jesus, I know you have a mission to Israel, but you see, I have a daughter who needs your help, and I am asking you to make an exception. Only you can help me. And then we have Christ's very difficult response in verse 26. It is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to their dogs. Now, a lot of commentators see this comment about dogs as harsh and dismissive. Some even characterize it as brutal, that it's meant to be a contemptuous insult. But I believe that's wrong. Admittedly, Jesus is playing into the cultural prejudices that this woman represents in order to make his point. He's also substantiating what he just said about the lost sheep, the children he has come to feed. He is saying it's not right for me to neglect my primary mission. As an example, let me take you back in time to when my children were all preschoolers. And let's say my wife is preparing a wonderful breakfast for them all, and we call them all to the breakfast table, and they're sitting around with their empty plates in front of them. They're all hungry. And what my wife and I end up doing is scraping all that wonderful food into the dog's bowl and setting it down for the dog to eat, and my children all go hungry. I think we would all agree that ain't right. And my kids would have been helpless. They would have been dependent on the provision that I make for them. And this woman would have also perceived the cultural prejudice in such a remark because Jews regularly referred to Gentiles as dogs. And here we're not talking about nice dogs. These are scavenger dogs, stray dogs, unsavory dogs, the kind of dogs that travel in packs and survive by feeding in the garbage dump. Outcasts, exactly the way the Jewish people perceived this woman. Because of this, the Jews of Jesus' time did not generally keep dogs as pets. Dogs as pets was more of a Greek custom. And Jesus seems to recognize this, for the word he uses for dog here is not the word for the unsavory dogs, for the dogs that travel in packs, but it's the word that's reserved for household pets, for cute puppies. But does that really make this any better? Because, gentlemen, I challenge you to try to compliment the ladies in your life by comparing them to a golden retriever. It's not going to work. Jesus is ultimately testing this woman to see if she's sincere. Is she serious? Does she only have a casual interest? Does she view him as just another spiritual healer like the priest at the pagan temple she would have paid money to in order to get her daughter help? Or is she seeking a salvation she knows only comes from Jesus, that only he can provide? And Jesus is allowing this woman's clever response to serve as a lesson to his disciples and ultimately to us. And what does she say that's so clever? Well, first of all, she doesn't react. She doesn't get angry. She's not insulted. She seems to agree with Jesus' assessment. Yes, the children's needs must be met, but the little dogs have their place too. Even the little dogs under the table can get to the crumbs. If we read between the lines, again, this is what she's saying. She's saying, Jesus, I get it. You're right. I'm not saying I belong at your table. I know my background doesn't make me a part of your covenant family. But you see, I still need your help. And I know that you're the only one who can help me. So what does this mean? Jesus is giving his disciples a glimpse of the future. The argument Jesus has just had with the Pharisees was that on the one side, the Pharisees saw the gift of God as something exclusive. Jesus, however, steps outside of the boundaries of the common conceptions of his time and presents a person who falls completely outside of that exclusivity, an alien, an outsider. And he recognizes that she's the one who's gotten the right answer in this controversy. And for that correct answer, for her response, Jesus tells her, you will find that the demon is gone. Because you see, the issue was never about nationality or race or gender. This woman's response to Jesus is the perfect picture, perhaps the most perfect picture of what it means to come to Christ. In fact, Jesus commends her. She says, you have great faith. That's the only time in the New Testament that phrase is ever used. And perhaps it's because this is indeed the ultimate picture of what it means to come to Jesus and to trust in Jesus. Because you see, she didn't argue that her claims were as good as everybody else's. She doesn't debate the whole Jew versus Gentile controversy. She doesn't dispute these mysteries, these things that are hard to understand, the mysteries of the kingdom of God. No, she just comes confident that Jesus is the only one that can help her and that Jesus is the only one she can turn to. And that's the only way any of us can come to Jesus. And we need to come to him and say the very same thing that this woman said, Lord, help me. Now, if I think, how would I have responded if somebody comes to me and told me that the needs of my poor, suffering child were at the same level as some stray dog? Or I recognize that the inference was that perhaps he's referring to me as a stray dog, or to my race or my ethnic group as a dog, or my family as a dog. And I know how I would have reacted. It would have been, how dare you? How dare you demean me and my child and my race and my gender? How dare you put me off like that? I mean, think of how our society reacts whenever this sort of thing confronts somebody. The reaction is always the same. It's how dare you? Just think of any recent political debate. It always comes down to somebody claiming that I deserve respect. I deserve my rights. My case is as good as anybody else's. How dare you refer to me as a dog? But the problem is, Jesus is speaking the truth. We are dogs. In fact, we are less than dogs. The Bible is clear that in coming to God and having a right relationship with God, we have nothing to bring to the table. And we are nothing. To paraphrase all the scriptures that speak to this, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. All we like sheep have gone astray. There is none righteous, not one. Our righteousness is like filthy rags to God. In the bright light of day that shines from the throne of God, the truth is we are nothing. So to try and argue that we can't be insulted like this, or that we deserve some sort of recognition, or that we have some sort of right to something, the truth of the matter is, in trying to be right with God, we don't have any rights. We have nothing positive in us to give. We are nothing. So the key to understanding this story lies in two words: humility and faith. This woman showed true humility when she acknowledged that her place was as low, or perhaps lower than a dog. She recognized Jesus as the Son of God, the Messiah, the only one who deserves our praise, because remember, in her plea for help, she was truly worshiping. And she admitted that she was nothing and that she deserved nothing, and that is the only way we can ever approach God, in total, abject humility. And she also showed true faith, because she recognized that all she needed was a crumb. Many of us come to God with all kinds of grandiose ideas about what we want and what we expect. And when we don't receive what we expect, we get angry, we get offended, we're insulted. He not only called me a dog, but all he offered me was a crumb. This woman had the right idea. All it takes is a tiny crumb falling from the master's table, and her needs would be met. Now, how many of us react with humility when we are tested by God about our attitudes? How many of us think or know that it will take only a crumb from the Master's table to see that our prayers are answered? The humility of this woman touched the heart of Jesus, and he responded to her faith. I believe it was to show his disciples, and therefore to show all of us, how it's supposed to be done. Now, I don't know about you, but this is a huge challenge to me. Usually when I am confronted about my attitudes, I get defensive. I make excuses. I tend to blame other people. I do not always readily accept what the Lord says to me when he's challenging my attitudes. And I also know that when I'm praying about the things that I need or that I think I need, I'm praying about things that I perceive are big ticket items. I'm not praying for crumbs. In fact, that is where my greatest challenge comes in this story. To learn to shift my attitude around and accept what God gives me to answer my needs when I think I deserve something more. That's the issue. I think I deserve. The truth of the matter is I deserve nothing. I'm just a dog who depends on the generosity of the Master to meet my needs. Now, I know some of you out there are getting hot under the collar, and you're saying, hey, what about God's love? What about his unconditional acceptance of us? What about the fact that we're God's children? Oh, yes, that is all so very true. But that's when we've been admitted into his covenant. This woman was an outsider, and that's where we all start. We have to seek God's help first and receive his love and his grace. And what I would suggest is that many of us see the love and grace of God as being mere crumbs, and we're looking for material blessings instead. We need to adjust our attitude to recognize that a mere crumb from God is worth more than $1 billion from the world. We need to adjust our attitude and recognize that we are dogs who don't deserve God's love and mercy, but we need to come to that realization. That is the key. And then we can cry out, Lord, help me. Lord, have mercy. And then we can receive what we need to be in a right relationship with God. And I thank you ever so much for allowing me to share this morning.